Next, we'll hear from Clay Robbins of 0x. Clay is going to speak with us about why gaming matters, something that I don't think is well understood or appreciated outside the space, and frankly could be better understood and appreciated within the space. I'm eager to hear his lessons. Clay, take it away.
All right, so thanks for the introduction. And I'm Clay Robbins, and I lead ecosystem development here at 0x. And so today I wanted to talk to you about why gaming matters in the context of both crypto generally, as well as from the perspective of 0x. And so first, I think it's worth level setting something extremely important, that in the context of gaming, blockchain should be considered a feature rather than a product, because at the end of the day, game developers are in the business of creating experiences. And what blockchain enables is a unique series of elements that augment that experience that developers are working to create. And so I want to touch on three key elements that I think are enabled by blockchain that we're excited about in the context of gaming. So those three are true digital ownership, digital scarcity, as well as interoperability. And so starting with the first, when we think about true ownership, it's enabled by the fact that crypto is a bearer instrument, meaning that you have 100% control of assets, assuming you're using a non-custodial wallet. And this is great because in the traditional gaming model, while you earn assets that are attributed to something like your account, you never actually truly own them, and you're at the mercy of gaming companies' desire to maintain support for those assets. And furthermore, after playing a game for something like 6 months, oftentimes you get bored and want to move on to the next in the series. But all of that time spent has accrued really nothing of value. And so this is where ownership, along with things like interoperability, become really interesting, because say you're playing Grand Theft Auto throughout the entirety of the series like I have, and accrued all sorts of items. Those will likely be worth a lot in terms of both utility in the game, but also on things like secondary markets that can be enabled with this idea of interoperability and ownership. The second element that I want to talk about is digital scarcity. And so scarcity is not a novel concept. It's something that exists in the real world and is a tried and true concept that is most recognizable with brands like Jordan and Supreme that have formed this sort of business model around things like conspicuous consumption, where limited runs of releases of products are perceived to be more valuable simply because they're rare. And the other side of this coin is that when centralized entities and humans get involved in this process and decide to increase production or supply of what were once sort of rare items, it has trickle-down effects for secondary markets of these items. And so when we think about limited run issuance of Jordan 1s, when Nike came out and said that they were going to increase production, the secondary value of those shoes went down, even though they were once considered limited. And so the same thing can be said for game assets like cards in games like Magic the Gathering, where the power balance and frequency of cards' appearance in decks and tournaments is thrown out of whack when the company decides to increase production of specific cards that were once previously considered to be limited. And so with things like non-fungible tokens and true verifiable digital scarcity, you have this nice combination of things like conspicuous consumption and utilization of these assets without the concern that human intervention will change the rules in an unfavorable manner. And so with things like land and Decentraland, we're starting to see this interesting combination come together with things like buying a massive estate for a Genesis CryptoKitty shrine. And so we'll start to see these concepts play out as digital scarcity takes hold in the gaming community. And so to explain sort of the third concept, which is interoperability, I love this metaphor that I'm kind of stealing from Donnie at Bitsky, which is any inanimate object in the physical world. Take, for example, a pencil. A pencil is it's a purpose-built instrument that its utility really transcends the setting that it's in. So you can write with it. You can use it to fill in bubbles on a standardized test. You can use it to clean your ears. But really, again, the functionality sort of transcends the setting that it's in. And so with things like NFTs and combining it with elements of 0x like network liquidity, we can achieve the same effect in the digital world, but to a greater degree because we're not bound by sort of this the laws of reality. So to bring that to the gaming world, take for example a key. that in one instance can simply be used to open a door in something like The Sims or another virtual world simulator. That key through interoperability can be repurposed to be something like the most coveted reward for a scavenger hunt like we've seen in the movie Ready Player One. And so this end state, while I think it's certainly a ways off, with things like virtual reality, shared liquidity enabled by 0x, and non-fungible tokens, I think the foundational elements are starting to come together for these experiences to start to be built in the gaming world. And so taking a step back, I want to talk a little bit about sort of where we are today in the gaming space. Through most of 2017 and 2018, I think we saw that speculation was really the killer use case for both ERC20 and ERC721 assets because they lacked a core function that's needed to drive use case expansion beyond speculation, which is actual utility in games. And so it's not surprising that some of the early games were casino-like games as well as things like CryptoKitties. And so in terms of product experience, that played out with things like auction marketplaces that were created where kitties were bought and sold. And while it's certainly a novel implementation of the tech where you had true verifiable digital scarcity, I think what will drive long-term value outside of speculation is the ability to create mass adoption through habitual behaviors, which speculation, if it cuts the wrong way, actually drives users out of the ecosystem. And so we're starting to see utilities start to take hold with games like Skyweaver from Horizon Games that I think has elements of speculation, and certainly there will be secondary markets for their assets, but the primary function will be the gameplay, and that's where the utility will be derived. And I think that will appeal to a massive audience of new users who don't necessarily care about crypto, but really just love the gameplay, and eventually will discover the elements of crypto once they understand that these assets that they're earning and using actually have real world value on secondary markets. And so outside of things like Horizon Games, we're also seeing implementations of games that abstract away sort of 99% of the blockchain elements of games in order to increase accessibility to a larger audience and also work to get distribution. So one example of that is Hashleets, which is a fantasy football-like app where player cards are bought in the app and used to build teams, which are then played against other users' teams each week for a pot of money at the end of each week, and that's distributed through the app. And so if you look at a lot of their marketing material and the way that they've positioned the game, you don't see the word NFT, you don't see the word crypto. It's purely a fantasy football-like game. But under the hood, all of these assets, the cards and like, are actually represented as NFTs. So you can see a world where once they've achieved distribution, they can open up a secondary market where these assets can be freely traded. And so we've talked a lot about sort of the user experience, but I want to pull back to more of the developer side of things and how do you build a business model out of this? And I think that that's where there's still a lot of learning and tinkering to be had. And so from a macro view, I think we're sort of at this peak of fee abstraction in the gaming industry and a lot of industries. I mean, even across banking, you see this as well. And that's been evidenced by some of the recent developments where things like the Epic Games Store has rolled out to undercut both the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, and the Steam Store on fees assessed for both the microtransactions in games as well as purchases of games. So as you have this sort of downward pressure in the ability to abstract fees, then developers and folks trying to build businesses around these games will start to seek alternatives for being able to build a business. And so when you look at the options there, I think one way that they can achieve this is through increasing distribution. And one of the best ways to increase that distribution is through open secondary markets where distribution is essentially limitless when you combine it with things like interoperability, because you can have permanence of objects that can continue to accrete revenue over time and have them have utility beyond just a single game, which is really exciting. And so now turning the attention to 0x and why do we care about gaming? So at its core, 0x is a decentralized exchange protocol built on Ethereum that allows for any developer to easily drop in exchange functionality into a variety of product experiences. It allows traders to exchange assets in a peer-to-peer or wallet-to-wallet fashion, which reduces the risk of trusting your assets to a third party. And so our point of view is that exchange is a core function that'll underpin the entire tokenized economy, and that extends to games. So exchange is not just trading via chart views and speculation, but actually has this utility in gaming markets as well. And what's great is from the developer's perspective, through great documentation and just a couple of lines of code, and the fact that it's free and open source, 0x is the easiest way to add that exchange functionality. And so if you pull back to the context of what makes the 0x ecosystem work, you can kind of see how this flywheel starts to take effect, where we provide great tooling and documentation that makes it extremely easy for game developers to focus on building the game experience while easily plugging in exchange functionality into their game and marketplace. And so by lowering this barrier to entry, this allows more markets and more game assets to be supported, which in turn brings more users because there's more options of games to play. And so as more users come in and are created and more games are created, and folks are able to increase distribution, this leads to greater interoperability of assets through what we have been mentioning through the concept of network liquidity, which over the long run, again, lowers the barrier to entry for games to plug into the network. And so we're already trying to show the power of this network liquidity to enable easier distribution of assets and accessibility to game assets through a feature called 0x Instant, which allows for one-click asset purchasing to be dropped into any product experience with just 4 lines of JavaScript. And what's even greater is that we can, folks that are implementing Instant can assess an affiliate fee. So you have these new business models that can be created for things like gaming blogs that could partner with games to add Instant in the sidebar a la Google Ads and actually assess an affiliate fee for purchases of the game assets for the game that they're writing about in that blog post. So we'll start to see some of those initial models take hold as these new NFT-enabled games start to roll out. So bringing it back to a summary of what we've covered today, I think if you remember nothing else, I think the 3 things that we're really excited about at 0x in the context of gaming that blockchain enables are true ownership, digital scarcity, and interoperability. So we're excited to see those trends play out over the coming months and years. And I love to talk about this stuff, and I could talk about it for a long time. So if you want to continue the conversation, definitely feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Krabby Lions or via email at clay@0x.org. So again, thanks to Mainframe for having me here, and really excited to share why we're excited about gaming, and looking forward to seeing all of the other presentations as they roll out here. So thanks again.